I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Alan Williams. And I think you all have, you can come up here and see his bio and his information if you're not familiar with Dr. Williams. But I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to introduce it. I'm just going to introduce him and say, Dr. Williams, welcome. Come on up. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. How is everybody? So good to see everybody. I've seen most of you through the years, quite a number of you many times. So again, great to be here. I'll be sharing quite a few things over the course of the next 3 days pertaining to where we're at and what's happening. There are actually a lot of, in my opinion, very exciting things happening now in regenerative agriculture. There's a lot of new developments that I'm going to be sharing with you this week that you likely have not heard about yet. And I'm also going to be sharing how you can be participatory in a lot of those different types of things, what it means to you. So we're going to open up this morning with some of the key things for implementing regenerative agriculture on your farm, your individual farms. And then, like I said, later on we're going to dive deep into a lot of other different topics, from regenerative verification, what about all this carbon market, what about ecosystem services, what about processing, so on, and what are the key new developments. So most of you know who we are within Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy. My partners and I founded both of these two companies, and we are real-life farmers and ranchers, so that's one of the major things that we bring to the table, is the fact that we actually do this ourselves on a day-in, day-out basis. We've consulted with thousands of farmers and ranchers and with many other types of entities. We are consulting with institutions, agencies, even now with the USDA. Next week, we're actually going to do a multi-day workshop with the USDA, and we're going to have all the key personnel present at that workshop, including Secretary Vilsack himself. So that's a first. That's never happened before. We are consulting. You can see just a brief list of some of the companies that we're consulting with. Practically, and we're going to talk more about this week because this has a lot of bearing on agriculture as a whole. But practically every company out there, and especially all the major agribusiness companies, food companies, fiber companies, and so forth, have made some type of commitment that they're going to have to meet by 2030, because they also set a date. And practically everybody said 2030, we're going to be carbon zero, carbon neutral, whatever their term is, right? That's what we're going to be. But the truth of the matter is they have absolutely no clue how to get there. And I just spoke a couple of weeks ago at the National Restaurant Association convention and conference, and I can assure you, having been there with all the heavy hitters in the restaurant sector for that week, they really do not have a clue. But they know they got to do something because they've made the promises, and even the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, is now holding their feet to the fire because they have made these promises to their shareholders, all right? So now they made the mistake of getting the SEC involved, and they're scrambling. They're scrambling, and they're finally realizing that the only way that is going to happen for them is off the backs of us, farmers and ranchers, because they don't own the land, they don't control the land, they don't farm the land, they don't ranch the land. We're the only ones that can sequester carbon. Delta Airlines cannot, Shell Corporation cannot, McDonald's cannot, None of them can sequester carbon. We are the ones that can sequester carbon. And guess what? Everybody on that list and many, many more are after our carbon. Okay? So we're going to talk a lot about that in one of our sessions. We now have full-time consulting staff in 4 different countries, U.S., Canada, Mexico, and the U.K., and are continuing to expand in that. Quite a few countries that we've consulted in now, all 50 states, and we're actually up to about 34 million acres in the U.S. now under regenerative transition. So it is continuing to expand. This is our definition. You got to have a definition. I want to make sure that you understand this, and we do feel highly qualified to define it because we do it every day. And it is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem functions, starting with life within the soil, which is critical, and then expanding to life above. And many of you have heard me and others within Understanding Ag talk about the 6-3-4, and I'm going to delve into that just a little bit today and then point out of this what is most critical to you making regenerative progress and having success on your individual farms and ranches. So I love this quote. I use it really every single time I speak because it is that meaningful. And it is by W.C. Loudermilk from Conquest of the Land Through 7,000 Years, where Loudermilk says the land does not lie. It bears a record of what men write on it, a record that is easy to read by those who understand the simple language of the land. And I promise you, that is true. We step foot every year on many, many farms and ranches all over the world. And I promise you, no farmer, no rancher can lie to us in terms of how they manage the land, and especially, Russ, when we stick a shovel in the ground. Okay? Because what we see beneath the soil surface tells a decades-long and even a centuries-long story that the farmer cannot deny or hide. So our management is very much written on the tapestry of the land. And we use this quote often as well. Gabe Brown, one of my partners, always uses this when he speaks. But if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make major changes, you have to change the way you see things. In other words, the way we think. Yeah, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again this morning. In agriculture, we have 2 types of compaction. We have the compaction in the soil beneath our feet, and we have the compaction in between our ears, right? So we're actually dealing with trying to resolve the 2 different types of compaction, and this one is harder to resolve than the one beneath our feet. That's actually far easier than resolving the compaction here. So this is what it's all about with regenerative. It's all about life. It's not about how do we kill things. It's about how do we promote more and more and more life. And how do we restore a fully functioning carbon cycle? Now remember this, because in my presentation later, when I delve into carbon markets and the concepts that are being presented today relative to carbon, it's really antithetical to what we're talking about here in terms of a carbon cycle. This is what we need to be about the business of doing. We need to be about the business of recreating and restoring a fully functioning carbon cycle. Carbon is meant to cycle, And that's how this world works optimally. So we'll talk again more about that this afternoon. Now, what we have seen over and over and over, and it doesn't matter what your environment is, many of you in the past, if you've watched my presentations, you've seen me present the data from the work we've done in the Chihuahuan Desert. I'm not going to do that this morning, but most of you have seen that, and you've seen the tremendous progress that we've been able to make even in a very harsh environment. But this is what we're seeing over and over. As we move along this continuum from what I'm going to define as continuous or set stock grazing into real adaptive grazing, we see this explosion of life, starting with life beneath our feet, within the soil, and expanding to life above. So the 634, again, I'm going to briefly define those for you, and then we're going to spend time on what are the key things that are going to allow you to make the most progress and to get over those little frustrating humps that you encounter on your farm. So in the 634, there are the 6 principles of soil health. And the very first one is context. Context is absolutely critical. If you don't first take the time to fully define and understand your context on your farm, then you cannot adequately, appropriately, and successfully apply the other 5 principles. Because if you're applying the other 5 outside of context, it's not going to work. This is why people say regenerative agriculture doesn't work. Well, I tried that and it failed. Well, if it failed, you were doing it out of context for your farm. That's why it failed. It does not fail. And I'll stand on that statement every day. It does not fail, ever, ever, when you apply these principles within your individual context. So context. Do not disturb, so minimize disturbance, and that's all different types of disturbance. So minimize tillage, minimize synthetic and chemical application or stored manure application, minimize overgrazing, all of these types of things. So minimize and even mitigate disturbance. Keep the soil covered and armored. This is so important. I measured last year and this year. I've measured way too many soils at 150 plus degrees. The highest I measured, Greg, I measured some out west this year at 162. Now, I don't know about you folks, but I don't cook any of my meats to 162 degrees, okay? So, I mean, I take my steaks off at about 130, all right? So, everything for me is overcooked at 160. So what are we doing to our soils? Literally, what are we doing to our soils at that kind of temperature range? Okay? Mix it up. Diversity, it's so important. And you're going to hear me hammer on that all week long, the concept of diversity. Living roots in the soil year-round, and then whenever possible, integrate livestock, integrate animals. So that's the 6 principles. Then we have the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, and I'm going to go into these in more detail because this is really where the rubber meets the road for success on your individual farms. They are the rule of compounding, the rule of diversity, and the rule of disruption. And I'm going to go into those in just a little more detail in a moment. And then we implement the 6 principles and the 3 rules so that we can optimize our capture of the 4 ecosystem processes and their function. And they are energy flow, sunlight, photosynthetic activity. That's what creates the energy we need that drives everything else in agriculture. Okay? Unfortunately, what we see in agriculture today, I call it photosynthetic leakage or wasted sunlight. We have way too much sunlight that hits the soil without being intercepted by a plant leaf. That's never good. That is truly wasted energy. We don't want to waste a lick of sunlight. We want it all to be intercepted by nature's perfect solar panel, a plant leaf. Then the water cycle, which is very broken today, the mineral cycle, which is also broken, and then we have, there it is again, diversity. So how important is diversity? It's one of the 6 principles, it's one of the 3 rules, and it's one of the 4 ecosystem processes. Diversity must be pretty dang important. But yet, what do we see in today's agriculture as a whole? How did we get there? How did we ever develop the concept? There you go. That's probably number 1, isn't it? We developed the concept that we believe monoculture agriculture is the way to go. And it's often touted as the way to, quote, feed the world, right? Well, over the course of the next 3 days, I'm going to absolutely rip that down, and I'm going to rip it to shreds. That is a wholly erroneous statement and argument, completely. As a matter of fact, it's the way that over time we are going to fail to feed the world, okay? So the top 3 barriers to adoption, I present these every time as well, and they're global. Every country we go to, it's the same top 3 barriers. We just had at our farm over the weekend and on Monday a group of Bhutanese farmers, okay, from Bhutan, and then some of their government officials were there, and they acknowledged the same 3 barriers in their country, okay? But they are a lack of awareness and education. You cannot implement what you do not know. So as a farmer, as a rancher, if we don't truly understand regenerative principles and practices, we can't properly and effectively and profitably implement them. As a researcher, and I'm a former university researcher and professor, but as a researcher, I cannot do research on what I don't know. Yet that is exactly what we're seeing. I see a lot of our land-grant universities doing regenerative research, and it's regenerative in name only. When you look at what they actually did, they didn't implement anything regenerative. So it was name only. And why? Do what? Grant money. But why? Because they themselves do not understand regenerative. Again, you can't research what you do not know. Peer pressure, and boy is this huge, and you know, I used to think, and I'm 6th generation, and I used to think peer pressure was really bad in agriculture here in the U.S., but you know what? Boy, you go to other countries, and it's even worse. I go over to the UK, I go over to Scotland, Ireland, or European countries, or even these guys from Bhutan. Whew, they got hundreds and hundreds of years of peer pressure that they're dealing with. So peer pressure, and unfortunately it comes from a whole host of sources, not just family and friends and neighbors. And then debt load, and in the U.S. it's the greatest it's ever been. We've never carried as much debt as farmers and ranchers than we're carrying today. So it is enormous, and the ironic thing about debt is this. If you're in debt as a farmer, it's because of the way you've been doing things. Why are you in debt? Because of the way you've been doing things. But it's that very debt, and here's the ironic part. If you're in debt, you desperately need to change what you're doing so you can get out of debt. But the fear of debt keeps you trapped in doing things the same way. When you most need to change, you fear change because you believe that if I change something and it doesn't work, I just lost the farm because I am so in debt, right? So debt is a huge burden. And so one of the things that we do is work very hard to help farmers and ranchers resolve their debt issue. So I'm going to show you a series of slides here on some of the farms and ranches that we're working with, where I'm going to give you a little bit of a timeline here and show you what we've been able to achieve in terms of building soil and building soil aggregation. This is really, really important because this is an indicator of a much higher level of soil function and profitability and productivity and health. So here's sort of starting point divots, shovel test pictures on a number of different clients, farms, and ranches, and then I'm going to show you where they're at in year 4. Okay, so we're going to take you from year 1, just getting started, to year 4, where are they at then? All right? So you can see in these pictures crusting on soil surface. You can see lack of aggregate. If there is any aggregate, it's very, very shallow and very small aggregates. And then you can see compaction and plating in the soil. So that's very typical. That's what we see 99% of the time when we stick a shovel in the ground for the first time on most farms and ranches. And again, here, perfect examples. You can see the plated layers here breaking off on the one to the left, and then on the one to the right there, you see, and that's sort of a clay soil there, and you can see just zero aggregate there whatsoever, and almost impenetrable in terms of being able to infiltrate water and that type of thing. So that's what we've been dealing with, and these are the types of issues that we see over and over and over again. So in just 4 years, can we make a radical difference? I don't mean a little difference, but can we make a radical difference in what these soils look like? Well, you must have seen the slideshow, but all right, so here we go. Same farm, same ranches. You can see that these soils are aggregated all the way down the depth of the divot, and you can see the aggregates clinging to the roots. You can see rhizosheath coating, all of those types of things. So we're seeing soils that went from little to no aggregation and heavy plating and compaction to zero plating and compaction and very deep, large aggregation. Building that over a period of just 4 years. And again, here we measured on some of the ranches that I have just been on here very recently. And a lot of these out west and a lot more arid land where it should take, or soil scientists tell us it takes a heck of a lot longer to do this. Well, does it? Does it? We measured aggregation 4 years ago was 2 inches or less on these same ranches. On several of these ranches here just in August, we measured aggregate depth of 14 to 20 inches in just 4 years. Okay? 14 to 20 inches in just 4 years. And you can see the depth of aggregate. And look all the way down at the bottom of that profile, and you still see the aggregates clinging to the roots and the rhizosheath coating, a foot or more down. Okay? So that's what we're wanting to do. That's what we're wanting to achieve. Again, tremendous aggregate clinging and rhizosheath coating, and we dug a soil pit there, the picture on the right. We dug that 6 foot deep, and again, there we were measuring aggregate depth of over 20 inches. And again, achieved in just a period of 4 years. So that's phenomenal progress, incredible progress in a short period of time. Now, how did this manifest itself otherwise for those ranchers? Well, their livestock are now far healthier, far fewer health problems. The performance is a lot better. Their water infiltration rate has increased between 300 and 400% on these operations. So now they're retaining a lot more moisture in environments that don't get a lot of moisture. Okay, so it's really important that that happens for them. Their nutrient cycling is far better. They're seeing far more diversity appearing because of the high levels of aggregation in the soil. So everything from biodiversity to health to performance has increased dramatically over the 4 years, not just the depth of the aggregate. See, that's just simply the sign, the indicator that tells us that many, many other good things are happening and going on. So here's, in turn, when we looked at the average improvement across the farms and ranches represented in those pictures, over the 4 year period, total fungi in the soil increased 176%. Total mycorrhizal fungi increased 153%, and saprophytic fungi increased 199%. So we saw a radical shift in the soil microbial population, going from highly bacterially dominant to having a really good bacterial fungal balance, which is where we want our soils to be. This is, we do a lot of work out in California in the Central Valley. These pictures are far too easy to take, and it's actually very disturbing driving through the Central Valley right now because they are desertifying it incredibly rapidly. I mean, this is the Central Valley of California is turning into a great American desert very rapidly. These are typical almond and walnut orchards that you see mile after mile after mile. And they're told to do it like this because they're told if you've got anything growing there, it's going to compete with the walnut and the almond trees for nutrients and moisture, and you can't have that. So they're told keep it bare underneath. And this is a university model orchard. It's not much better, is it? Still a whole bunch of bare ground there. So that's one of our Soil Health Academy classes, and we were able to go out to the university there and go through that orchard, and we put an infiltration ring in the ground, and 3 hours later, all the water was still in the infiltration ring. Not even 1/10 of an inch had infiltrated into the soil after 3 hours. We tried to do the shovel test and failed. We should have brought a pickaxe instead because all you could do is chip the soil with the shovel. That's about it. And we found out from university faculty and staff that were responsible for this research and model orchard that they spray it an average of 15 times a year. Okay? Plus, they're using a lot of irrigation and a lot of added synthetic fertility. So, then we went just 30 minutes down the road to one of our clients' orchards to show our class that you can do this radically different. So this is Daniel Unruh's orchard, and we actually have a case study published on the website about Daniel. But he attended his first Soil Health Academy in 2018, and his orchards looked just like the others, okay, pre-2018. But Daniel, when he attended the academy, he decided to make a radical shift in the way he was doing things. So he went back home to his orchards, and these are walnuts here, and he planted complex annual cover crops throughout his entire orchards. Okay? Well, let's see. Okay, so again, these are different sections of his orchards, and I took all these pictures this year in March when we were back out there. So is he grazing it? Yes, he is. And he wasn't doing that before. There wasn't anything to graze before, right? It's hard to graze bare dirt. So he's now grazing. That's 1,000 head of sheep in there, okay? Move daily under polywire. So the sheep are now supplying all the fertility. He's not buying any fertility to apply. The sheep supply 100% of the fertility for his trees now. So what else, though, are those sheep supplying, folks? It's really important. Okay, but what's even more important than that? Maybe not more important, but as farmers and ranchers, we think it's pretty important. There you go. More income off the same acres. This is what I want you to understand. He didn't add acres. It's the acres that he's still on that were in trees and walnuts. He just added sheep. So now off the exact same acres, instead of just walnut revenue, he now has walnut revenue and lamb revenue. Okay? And that's not it. He's also added a bunch of beehives, so he now has honey revenue. Okay? And next year he's going to add chickens. So he's going to have broiler and egg revenue from the same acres without having to buy more acres and pay for more acres and pay more taxes and all of that. So here's what's happened. Since 2018, he has had a significant reduction in the amount of irrigation that he is applying, and that's really, really critical when you're talking about the Central Valley of California. He is using practically no pesticides of any kind now. no purchased fertility of any kind. It's all coming from the sheep. And his trees and the nut crops are far healthier. We've done the analysis, okay? Far better than they were prior. Now, pre-regenerative, he had a nematode issue, root-eating nematode issue, and it was damaging a lot of his trees. And he asked, all the companies, all the consultants out there, the universities, what do I do? What do I do? And everybody was telling him, we'll use this nematicide or that one or that one or that one. And he said, I tried everything everybody told me to try. He said, I tried at least a dozen different nematicides, and it did not make a difference. What made the difference? He has no nematode issues anymore. Why? Anybody know? Okay. So, the diverse cover crop has plant species like mustard that produce natural nematicides, okay, by nature. So his cover crops got rid of the nematodes. Wow, novel concept, huh? So here's another one of our clients out there in the Central Valley near Sacramento. These are almonds, but again, doing the same thing. Okay, same concept, doing the same thing, having the same type of success. Now, I'm happy to report that university, I think we shamed them a little bit. And this year, when we went back there, they were actually planting some. Now, they still thought they had to keep the tree row clean, so they were still doing that. But at least they were planting cover crops for the first time, okay? And then their research was, you can see they have alternating strips where they keep one strip of cover crop mowed and the other strip they let grow. And I can already tell them they don't have to do this research. I already know the darn answer. I can already tell them which one's going to work best and give them the greatest return. As a matter of fact, we saw that day because we had our class stick a shovel in the ground there, and there. And where was it easier to stick a shovel in the ground? Where you had the tall, mature cover crop. Where do you think, when we stuck infiltration rings in the ground, where do you think infiltration was the highest? Where you had the tall, mature cover crop. Okay? So very evident. So, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. This is where the rubber meets the road for you on your farms. Okay? The 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. The rule of compounding, rule of diversity, rule of disruption. So no matter what you are grazing or even growing, if you're growing crops, these 3 rules apply. All right? So the rule of compounding, again, you've heard me. If you've heard me speak before, you've heard me talk about this. So I'll just cover it very briefly. There never are any singular effects. Okay? We've got to understand that. There never are any singular effects. Everything is compounding, cascading, and they're never negative or neutral, they're either positive or negative. So this is a realization rule. We got to realize that compounding does actually exist. And that we're either every day creating positive compounding effects or negative compounding effects by what we do on our farms. Okay. The rule of diversity. We want diversity. It's as simple as that, guys. Okay? We want diversity. We don't want monocultures. We want diversity in plant species and plant functional group. We want diversity in terms of microbial species beneath the soil surface. We want diversity relative to the insects and pollinators that exist above the soil surface. We want diversity in birds and wildlife. So we want diversity. And why diversity? Because diversity creates positive compounding cascading effects. It creates and places into those plants far more phytonutrients. And later this week, I'm going to present hardcore data to you about how important these phytonutrients are to you, to me, and to every consumer, and why it should matter to us. And one of the plant functional groups that is most important in terms of phytonutrients, but the one we fight the most and think we just got to get rid of, are this plant group we call weeds, but are forbs. Okay? So They have a purpose. They have a purpose. They're never growing there just because. They are always growing there to heal something that we damaged, That's why they're growing. If we ever see a, quote, weed growing, go back home, go look in the mirror. That's the cause. We are. We always are. Okay? So what we've got to ask ourselves, whatever we see growing out there is why. What is nature trying to tell me? What's wrong? What needs to be healed in my soil? So here's some really good books that help in terms of understanding this. Weeds and What They Tell Us, Weeds, Guardians of the Soil, and Weeds, Control Without Poisons. So those 3 books are really, really good, and you can find a lot of information on the internet as well. In order to identify plant species and so forth, there's a really, really good app called Picture This. Some of you may already be using it, but I've used it all over the world, and it works pretty well no matter where we travel. But it's called Picture This, and it'll identify plants, and it'll tell you about the plants, okay? So diversity is key. That's what we're really looking for. And so what we do on our own farms is manage for diversity, and we don't sweat the weeds because the weeds are powerful and they're nutritious. So we don't sweat them at all. We don't worry about them at all. Here's what's in my seed bank. Here's what's actively growing on my farm, okay? I've documented more than 150 plant species now growing on our farm, more than 150. And I've also documented our livestock eating every one of those, okay? So they eat all of this. If you see something up there that you say, well, livestock don't eat that, yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. And I've got pictures and video and witnesses and everything else to prove that, okay? They'll eat absolutely every plant listed up there and many more. What about their value, their nutritive value? Okay, here's some common ones that we think, boy, I don't want those anywhere near me. You know, but let's look at the nutritive value. Look at crude protein values. Look at NDF, okay? And then let's look at, again, a lot of common weeds: pigweed, lamb's quarter, ragweed, smartweed, curly dot, pepperweed, so forth. Look at the crude protein, guys. It's better than a lot of your clovers. Okay, better than a lot of your tame grass species. And look at the in vitro dry matter digestibility of these plants. So livestock actually can perform, our cattle get mud fat on plants like this. So these are not detrimental. They're not harmful to us. And we've got the data now, working with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, and I'll present that later this week, showing an unbelievable phytonutrient profile in the end product, in the beef, in the pork, in the lamb, in the eggs. And we're doing it in dairy too, and we're seeing the same thing in dairy and in milk and all of that. So bottom line for your farm, here is where the rubber meets the road, guys, okay? The rule of disruption. This is where you make the progress. And this is where you not only make progress, but you keep progress going year after year, decade after decade. The rule of disruption. It took us a long time to come to this point in our own farms and in our own understanding. But now we have a very clear understanding of what we now call the rule of disruption. So what we know is nature has tremendous resilience and responds very, very well to challenges. So because of that, we can introduce planned, purposeful disruptions that allow us to make ongoing progress. So let me ask you this question to help you understand this a little better. What does it take for a world-class athlete to be able to be a world-class athlete? if they do the same exercise routine at the same duration and intensity day after day, year after year, what's going to happen? Going to hit a wall, right? And quit making progress, and then they're actually going to start going backwards in performance. They can't even maintain the same level of performance, right? Okay? So what does every athlete know they have to do if they want to continue to get better? They got to mix it up, right? They've got to alter that exercise routine routinely, right? In other words, they have to introduce planned, purposeful disruptions to be able to continue to make progress. Well, are we biology? Yeah. Okay. Is everything we're dealing with out here biology? Yeah. Well, why do we think that biology responds differently than our biology? It doesn't. Okay? So planned, purposeful disruptions. So in other words, don't do things the same way every time. And this is the hardest thing for farmers and ranchers, because we want routine. We think we crave routine. And we want to come up with a prescription. Just give me the recipe, Alan. Just give me the steps, and then I'll do it that way from now on. We never do that, and we never will. We never, ever give a client a recipe or a prescription, because adaptive management and regenerative agriculture is not a prescription, a recipe, a routine, or a formula, and never will be. And the moment that you try to make it that is the very moment you are no longer regenerative or adaptive. You are not. You just transition totally out of that. So how can we be disruptive relative to grazing? This is not an all-encompassing list, but here are some of the key ways that we can be continuously disruptive in what we're doing. Alter stock densities. I call it pulsing of stock density. Never pick a stock density and use that day in, day out, year in, year out. You're going to stagnate. You're going to hit a wall. Intentionally alter stock density. We alter stock densities. Usually our lowest now is about 40,000 pounds per acre. We rarely go below that, but we go on up to 1 to 1.5 million pounds per acre at times, okay? And everywhere in between. So we're altering pulsing stock density. Alter rotation patterns. Don't start every spring on the same pasture, on the same part of your farm, and then do the same rotation year in and year out. There's a thing called cellular memory that every cell of every organism out there has. And if you do the same rotation pattern every year, everything remembers that. And it says, I'm used to this. I don't have to become stronger, faster, more resilient, or gain endurance. I'm used to this. Okay? So alter rotation pattern, alter grazing height on and off. Now, boy, that's contrary to MIG grazing, isn't it? Management intensive grazing, where you're taught, nope, you always go on at this height and you always come off at this height, right? No. You'll stagnate, you'll hit a wall, you'll quit making progress, and you'll lose diversity. You'll lose diversity in your pastures, okay? Alter rest periods. This is huge. Number one out of all the disruptions. If you want to increase diversity, plant species diversity, you must alter rest periods. And for most people, that means lengthen your rest periods in between grazing events. You must. If you don't do that, you will not build diversity. You'll do the opposite. You will narrow diversity, decrease diversity, and then you'll find yourself renovating perennial pastures. We should never have to renovate a perennial pasture, ever. If we do, again, that's go home, look in the mirror day. It's our fault if we have to renovate a perennial pasture, okay? So alter rest periods. If you're like us, we have multiple species. We have cattle, and then we have multiple classes of cattle. We've got sheep, pigs, laying hens, broilers, on and on. And so alter species order. Alter time or season of a year a paddock is grazed, and even the number of days it may be grazed in a given year. Okay? Alter paddock configuration or shape. Do you know that the shape of the paddock makes a dramatic difference in how those animals utilize that paddock? Long, narrow, you're going to get a whole different impact than a square paddock, even at the same acreage covered under the paddock and the same stock density. It's not going to be the same impact at all. So shape of the paddock matters, direction of the paddock matters. Bale grazing can be a disruption. Planned burning can be a disruption. Leader-follower can be a disruption. Contour grazing, y'all have contour here. And this is critically important with a lot of the work we do out west. We don't want them building paddocks going up and down, okay, slope. You build paddocks following the contour and then move them up, moving from low to high, not high to low, okay, low to high. Contour grazing works incredibly well. We have dramatically altered diversity in forage biomass production on many western ranches using that contour grazing concept. And then we can do combinations of disruptions. Let me give you an example. So in a single grazing event, I can alter stock density, I can alter paddock configuration, and I can alter rest period. So now I've combined 3 disruptions into the same grazing event. That is very powerful when we do that and we start to combine disruptions together. So again, this is where the rubber meets the road, and I'm going to end up this morning by showing you real-life examples of doing that, okay, and what that results in. So this is on our farm in Alabama, and we're on the Black Belt Prairie. We can get a lot of ash growing. We can get honey locusts and things like that growing on the prairie. And this is putting 1 million pounds per acre of cattle out there, and they were out there just for an hour in a long, narrow paddock. When we turned them in, this ash and locust and all of that patch was so thick you couldn't even see through it at all, okay? But after just an hour of using these and then moving them out of there, and you see where they were eating honey locusts and everything else, you could see through it without any problem. And then we had an explosion of grass growth occurring up underneath there because of that impact and because of opening it up. And you repeat that process, and then the trees begin to die, okay? This is moving 600 head of grass fats on our farm from one paddock to the next. And again, you see with 600 head, it doesn't take any time at all to move them. And you'll start to see a lot of birds. You see wood swallows, the small dark birds there, and then you see the snowy egrets and all of that. And we see tremendous numbers of birds. We have seen a lot of new populations come in, like swallowtail kites and long-billed curlews and things like that are now making homes on our farm that we hadn't seen in decades and decades. So a lot of those are coming back. And again, you can see some of the stock densities we use when we're grass finishing on these animals. This is one of our clients in Minnesota moving their dairy herd. This is Derek Smits, but he moves them 4 to 6 times a day every day. And you can see he runs his calves. He's got nanny cows. He runs his calves there to develop them that way rather than yanking the calves off and raising them in a pen like most dairies do. He is highly, highly profitable. Highly profitable. Dairying this way, far more profitable than any of his neighbors. This is a Birdwell and Clark Ranch out in Henrietta, Texas, running 5,000 to 8,000 head of stocker calves in a single mob every year, moving them 4 to 6 times a day every day under a single strand of polywire, okay? So this ranch, when we first started working with them, they had 40+% bare soil. Now they're under 3% bare soil. They have made radical progress in a short period of time. Far more diversity in their plant species, tons of native species showing back up in the mix and growing there. Far better performance and health out of their cattle. This is a move. This is 5,300 head in this mob making a move, okay? 5,300 head. And imagine doing this 4 to 6 times a day, every day. All right? And this is how it's done. Raise the fence. You see the fence laying on top of the roof of the buggy? Raise the fence. 5,000 plus head just come streaming under. Yep, into the next paddock. This is not hard. Two people do this every day. Okay? They don't have a crew of 50 or whatever. 2 people for 5,000 plus head of cattle, moving them 4 plus times a day. This is the water. That's it. There's not multiples of those troughs. That's the trough for 5,000 plus head every day. Okay? So we don't need tons of water either, guys. They take turns. And everybody gets water. He's a stocker operator. The only way he makes money is if the calves perform. If they're lacking water, they don't perform. So they're not lacking water. They're all stockers. Yeah. But this is it. High flow valves. You can see 3-inch inlet there, banjo clips, all of that 3-inch line on top of the ground. Practically all of his line is on top of the ground. He doesn't have a lot of buried line. Okay? On top of the ground to run a 12,000 acre ranch.
Where is this?
Henrietta, Texas. That's about an hour, about 2 hours northwest of Dallas-Fort Worth area. This is on one of our clients' ranches in Pierre, South Dakota, the Standing Butte. That's 3,000 head of bison under a single strand of polywire, moved daily. And this is on our farm in Alabama. That's high stock density with chickens. Okay, so that's 8,000 laying hens. If you want to really get a high degree of trample, by golly, chickens are the way to do it. They won't leave a single blade of grass untrampled. Okay, so when I want really good trample, chickens. And everybody when they come to visit us, even to say, I don't like chickens. I don't want to see your chickens. But we say, oh, just come on and see them. And then they end up staying here the longest. They become fascinated by the chickens. So I just took this picture just this weekend at the farm. We're in a D2 drought. I just looked at the drought monitor this weekend, and we're in a D2 drought. Does that look like we're in a D2 drought? Now, we had just moved them into this paddock. There's 750 cows, not counting calves and yearlings and all of that in there. 750 cows, but you can't hardly see them, can you? That's how tall the grass is. Okay? They just sort of disappeared into the paddock. And we actually had our Bhutan farmers there, and they were like, where'd they go? Where'd they go? Yeah, they just disappeared as they moved into the paddock. But our neighbors are feeding hay. Their pastures look like this, okay, in the D2 drought. They're already feeding hay. We're not even anywhere close to having to feed hay. You what? That's about a 90-day rest. Our rest periods now have just naturally extended without us even trying, just through daily movement and adaptive grazing have extended to an average of 80 to 90 days. But that's about a 90-day rest there, yep. And we've got plenty of grass ahead of us for the fall and the winter. Last winter, we didn't feed a bale of hay at all. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that again this winter, but not a single bale last winter.
Was that controlled by your animal units?
Well, so, yeah, I mean, we stock appropriately, but we have more than tripled our carrying capacity over the last 6 years. Yeah, so we have steadily increased in total animals that our acres will carry. This is in Pennsylvania. This is actually Dwight and Roman. Okay, so Eastern PA, but they hosted a Soil Health Academy last year, and I asked them to do, and they're a dairy. I asked them to do an exclusion paddock and to just rest it for the whole year, and we held the academy in September. And they fought that hard. They did not want to do that, okay? They absolutely did not want to do that. but I had them do it. And then in June, and remember the academy was in September, in June, and then again in July, they called me up, Alan, this looks terrible. It's brown, it's dead. There's nothing but seed heads out here. This is horrible. Let us mow it. Please, let us mow it. And I said, no. Leave it until the academy. Then I'll let you do whatever you want after the academy, but leave it until the academy. I said, well, it's going to be nothing at the academy. What do you think you're going to show? I said, just leave it. So they did. That's what it looked like in September. So, and they sent me pictures of what it looked like in June and July. And did it look completely dead? Oh, yeah. There was nothing but brown there. But guess what happened? Because they still left it. What happened was the exact same plant species then said, oh, summer's not over. We need to start growing again. And it did. Every plant started growing again. And then it grew far more vigorously than it did before because of the extended rest that it had never experienced in a very long time. Okay? So by September, there was this incredible growth, and even the morphology of the plant had changed. The leaves on every different type of plant were much longer and much wider and more velvety in texture. So even the morphology had changed for the better. So when we had our class out there, this is what we found. And this was in the middle of a field. I also told them, don't put it at a field edge. Put it through the middle of a field. And boy, they fought that one too. And they had to go through it, all summer to get to paddocks on either side. But so they grazed the paddocks on either side in that same field more normally that summer and left this. And what we found when we got out there in measuring the total forage biomass production in the more normally grazed paddocks, all grazing season long through that September, versus this produced 3.5 times more forage biomass. Okay? The plant bricks on the other paddocks averaged 10%. That, as it stood right there, averaged 15%. And all those dairy farmers didn't believe that at all. And we said, here, you pluck, you measure, you do it. And it turned out the same. Okay? The soil aggregation was significantly greater here. Deeper, bigger aggregates, just like those earlier pictures I showed you. And again, I mentioned earlier, individual plant species morphology was distinctly different. And then guess what happened? They did finally turn the milk cows onto it, and they actually went up in milk production the day after they grazed that. Okay? So this is also very important. Protect soil temperature. Let me show you several pictures here. This is in the Chihuahuan Desert. So 154 degrees where we had bare soil, but immediately next door, the Regenerative Ranch, where they had a lot of stuff growing, 75 degrees, guys. Look at the difference. One fence line to another. That's all it was. 154 degrees, 75 degrees. Okay? This is in the same row crop field, just where the crops were growing better versus other areas of the field. Look at the gradient here, where you had plenty growing, 90 degrees, where it got a little thinner, 104, where it got a little thinner, 119, and then where you had a lot more bare ground, 136. Same field. That was actually a pivot, center pivot. And then this is an Illinois cornfield taken in August of this year versus the county road pavement right next to the cornfield. In the cornfield, it was 141 degrees. On the pavement, it was 126 degrees. And we have actually seen that over and over. The road surface is actually cooler than the soil, the bare exposed soil. And here's why that's important, guys. You can see that. Very important. Okay? So, keeping it covered matters. And it matters for this as well. Yes, sir? How far? Okay, yep. So so we use the infrared, the thermal, point and shoot, but we also have attachable probes with soil probes. So on the same unit, we can measure both surface and anywhere from 3 to 6 inches deep. And when it's that hot on the surface, 3 to 4 inches deep, it doesn't cool off very much at all. It's still within 5 to 10 degrees of what it is on the surface, okay? And so what we find over and over is that if it's that hot on the surface, you've basically lost all life and nutrient cycling and water cycling function in the top 3 to 4 inches of your soil. Yeah. And this is also critically important. And this is why in the middle of the D2 drought where we are, we were turning cattle into head-high grass, and our neighbors are feeding hay, okay? And their pastures look like you could play hockey on them. This is why, because we keep that root growth going at all times, because we limit the amount of total leaf volume they can consume in any one given graze. So this is what we've got to do. Implement the rules of disruption intentionally and never cherry pick from that list of disruptions. Alternate those disruptions routinely, okay? Don't just pick one or two and do them all the time. Now you're prescriptive again, and you're going to stop making progress. You'll make progress initially because it was a disruption, but you got to keep changing disruptions and observe, 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 okay? Just absolutely critical, and we use these 4 tools all the time. All right, they are critical tools for us. Questions?
Raise your hand if you have a question. We'll give you a mic.
Dr. Williams, in those moves that you showed us with those high volumes of cattle, I didn't see any mineral feeders.
No, sir.
Okay.
They're not there.
Okay. So,
Yep.
you know, we are sold on minerals and to provide minerals, free
Yes, sir.
choice minerals to our cattle. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yep. All right, so here's it. Now, let me first start by saying this, okay? In your early stages, a lot of you probably need mineral because you don't have enough diversity out there and you don't have enough soil function and nutrient cycling yet to be able to pull the minerals that are actually in the soil up into the plant for the animals to consume. So early on, you probably do need to supplement. But what we have found very, very clearly is that once you build aggregate in the soil and fungal population in the soil particularly, that's key. That is key. Russ and I were talking about that earlier. That is so core, is building fungal activity in the soil for higher levels of nutrient cycling, okay? So as we build diversity and we build that fungal activity, you find that mineral reliance goes way down till you just no longer need them because they're getting everything they need. We've done hundreds of thousands throughout all North America, John Abe, of what we call a T&D test, total nutrient digestion test of soils, and we have yet to find a soil anywhere in North America that is truly nutrient deficient. They're not. They're bound up because we don't have the microbial population to cycle them and to make them plant available. Okay, so that's the key. Diversity and aggregation. That's the key to being able to significantly reduce reliance on mineral.
Hey, to follow up on that, to build that diversity, it gets back to what you mentioned earlier, a longer rest period. That's the natural way of doing it. You're not saying go out there and sow it and drill it and all this bunch of stuff. You're saying a long rest period.
That's a very good point, Mike. And when I mentioned earlier that I've documented now more than 150 plant species on our farm, we did not plant even one of those, not a single one. Every one of those plant species came up from our latent seed bank. And we are finding that again all over North America and even in many other countries that we work in, that we can get for a perennial stand, we can elicit tremendous response from the perennial seed bank and not have to waste money on buying and planting perennial seed.
Other questions? Here we go.
Hi, I wanted to talk about the mycorrhizae fungus. Do you recommend, like if you're putting a cover crop in, getting some spores and put it in your seeds and then plant it, or you think that's just going to naturally come back? And when you have a drought and you're getting brown and there doesn't seem like there's living roots in the ground, are you going to have to replenish that? How does that work?
Two excellent questions. So first, there are more than 200,000 different mycorrhizal species. Now, if we are going to buy and apply mycorrhizae, at most, you're getting 2-3 species. Out of 200,000 plus, is that really working for us or not? Okay? Depends on what you start with. Okay? Now, I'm not saying never do that. Okay? So understand that, and I'm going to clarify that in just a moment. But do you ever completely lose your mycorrhizal populations? No. They go into spore form and they go to sleep. Okay? So they're waiting on the right conditions to occur once again in the soil. And then they wake up and they go to work and they repopulate and all of that. So yes, they're always there, and you can wake them up and get them working back for you. So I personally prefer to work with the native populations that are already there, because they are the ones that are there, and to use those. Now, that being said, if you are going to buy and apply anything, then do test. Never just trust that it's working for you, okay? Make sure you do strips where you're applying and you're not applying, so that you truly do know whether any product you're buying and applying is actually working or not. If you just apply it across the whole field because somebody said it will do this, well, you may believe it worked for you and it really didn't, okay? So always test any product you're going to buy and apply. And then the third thing I'll say about that, and then I'll talk about the drought, is that if we have worn out row crop fields or worn out hay field, one of the things that we have found to be very valuable in reestablishing those fungal populations and that fungal activity and all of that is to plant a diverse annual mix, not perennial, but diverse annual mix in there. We call those biological primers. And you definitely want to focus in those mixes on plants that are mycorrhizal associators. That's what you want in the mix, not brassicas and all of that. Brassicas are not mycorrhizal associators. And then the drought, okay, in a drought, they're going to go to sleep again. So as you get moisture back in the soil and you implement adaptive grazing practices again, you are going to wake them back up. And what we find is that if you've done that prior to a drought occurring, then after the drought, you will recover much quicker than your neighbors. You have far more resilience. Okay, so if you didn't hear that, what he said is, if there's a lot of mycorrhizal-rich soil and plants over here, can I use my livestock to inoculate soil over here and actually move mycorrhizal populations? The answer to that is absolutely yes. And we've done that over and over. And again, that's been very important to us out west, and a lot of these areas where we have used cattle and sheep to literally transport and move the mycorrhizal populations and the diversity, the plant species diversity. Yes.
Question
I
back
have a
in the
question.
back here. Back
Yes,
in the back.
whether you're starting out with a new farm or you're leasing new pasture, in addition to your seeding program, do you recommend putting a mineral sled in for the first few rounds of rotational grazing?
Minerals for the livestock?
Yeah.
Yes,
The mineral sled.
absolutely.
Okay.
Again, because early on, your plants, because you have a lack of that aggregation and that nutrient cycling in the soil, the plants are not taking up minerals like they should,
Right.
and so your livestock will be deficient just from eating the plants
So
alone.
when you go to lease some new pasture, it's good to put that mineral sled in for the first few rounds. It really helps to get everything.
Right.
level.
Again, this is a step by step. Don't just think you can cut everything out right off the bat and be successful. You can actually create deficiencies and things like that. So that is when, you may need to supplement and so forth initially, but continue to build. As you build diversity and you build aggregate, you'll actually see the livestock. The livestock will tell you as well. They'll eat less and less and less of that mineral in that trough or that mineral feeder.
That's what I've seen over the years, yes.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions? Here we go. Here, Mike.
So we try to graze the tall grass too, and around here we're cautioned against that. That'll bring pink eye in the cattle, and that's also got a nutrition and it's not a single thing. Would you address that, please?
Absolutely. Actually, I love that question. We get it an awful lot. So first of all, plain and simple, folks, period. Tall grass and seed heads do not cause pink eye, okay? You'll be amazed at how many veterinarians believe that. Tall grass and seed heads do not cause pink eye, and never will, okay? Do bison get pink eye? Yes. I've seen a lot of bison with pink eye on a lot of these conventional ranches. Now, if tall grass and all that causes pink eye, half of our national bison herd would have been blind and easy prey for wolves because they were grazing tall a lot of the time. So that does not cause pink eye. Rather, when we have pink eye outbreaks and things like that, 9 times out of 10, the formative cause of that, it's never immediate cause and effect, okay? You back up 4 to 6 weeks, those cattle were squirting pretty bad out the rear end because they were on highly, highly vegetative or high legume, high clover pastures or something like that, and just squirting, subclinical stress, high levels of circulating nitrogen. 4 to 6 weeks later, pink eye outbreak. Over and over and over again, we've seen it. So the pink eye was caused 4 to 6 weeks earlier, folks, due to the onset of subclinical stress. And then 4 to 6 weeks later, what's there? The flies, because that's when you start to begin your fly buildup for the summer. And then everybody thinks, well, now I got more seed heads and the flies, it's the seed heads and the tall grass causing the pink eye, because again, they're thinking immediate cause and effect, and it's not. It's not. So you don't have to worry about pink eye from grazing tall and all of that.
So how do you avoid having pink eye?
Yeah, so pink eye is, first of all, you've got to prevent subclinical stress. And so in the spring, if they're grazing a lot of high legume or whatever, then, and that's all you got, you really need to have some hay out there for them as well, okay? Because they've got to have some long stem dry matter roughage to dilute that out. But the other is, again, there can be other causes of subclinical stress, so you just need to pay attention to that. And again, pink eye outbreaks, and if you have an individual animal here or there, that's the individual animal. But if it's an outbreak, then that's a sign of wider spread subclinical stress in the herd, and then that's where you got to go back. It's never immediate cause and effect. That started weeks ago, and you got to go back and ask yourself the question, what was happening weeks ago that I observed that led to this? So that's what we do. And now keep in mind, when you saw that picture of how our cows disappearing and that stuff, guys, there was more than 100 different plant species out there. Yep. And stuff growing short, intermediate, and tall, and all different types of plant classes. So our livestock weren't just eating the tall stuff up here, they were eating a very, very diverse diet. So the other way to prevent pink eye outbreaks, foot rot outbreaks, is diversity of diet. The more diversity, and particularly forbs, the more diversity in forbs they have in the diet, the more medicinal compounds they're consuming, and the less likely they are to have those outbreaks. So diversity matters in that regard a lot.
Talking about the high, where you were just talking about, how much of the digestibility, and how hot was it when they were there? And how much of the digestibility goes away? Is that something we just need to give up for soil health, or are we sacrificing digestible biomass?
Okay, so that depends on how diverse your stand is. Okay, so if it's 90+%, say fescue, okay, or whatever, but picket, Bermuda grass, fescue, you pick it doesn't matter what species. But if it's just highly, highly dominant, that one species, then once it goes mature, that's all they got. And yes, you're sacrificing digestibility, and you're sacrificing protein, and you're sacrificing energy in their diet. Absolutely. That's why diversity matters. Because if, I may have some plant species in there that, yes, they're sort of mature and old, and they'll eat a little bit of that, but then I've got all of these other dozens of plant species in there that are at many other different stages of growth and digestibility and protein and energy. And so it's easy for them to balance a diet. So again, this is where diversity matters a lot, because those issues go away, they disappear. Those issues are a function of low diversity or monoculture. Right. So as we increase diversity, and we're grass finishing year round on that exact same type of pasture you just saw those cows in. Okay? Oh, we're getting 2.3 to 2.8 to 3, depending on the particular time period, and they're grading out, upper 2/3 choice.
Okay, guys, we're ready for a break. Dr. Alan Williams, thank you very much.
Thank you.